Hey LCSI students, welcome back, and it's Mr. Ramsey here if you can't tell. Sorry I can't be with you today, but we're going to be starting this cool lesson on using pollen as evidence and doing some great things with scopes and dissection. And so I want to give you a little intro video to give you some perspective on just where pollen comes from.
Perhaps you've seen this video online.
Okay, go ahead and shake it.
I think she nails it. That is one yellow cloud of doom for all of us allergy sufferers. So to find out what kind of tree this is and why it's releasing so much pollen, we contacted Kyle Wallach, a botanist from the U.S. Botanical Garden.
I think this is a cedar tree, and it's releasing pollen from its male cones. The pollen is meant to be airborne, and it produces a lot of pollen to make sure it gets to the receptive female cones that could be miles away. So the tree spends all of its energy on producing pollen rather than pretty flowers. And quite frankly, if you go out and look at your car right now, you'll see a whole bunch of pollen on it, most likely.
So that's who's doing that to my car. Tree! But in this video, there's actually someone beneath the tree shaking it. It's not like in nature you're going to see huge clouds of pollen drifting. Do you?
It's meant to be airborne, so by that reasoning, if you get a really good big gust of wind, you're going to see that kind of a pollen cloud generated. But mostly it's kind of a gradual release.
And if someone's got really bad allergies, like I do, you probably wouldn't want to stand directly beneath a tree when someone's shaking it like this, right?
Probably, especially if you're asthmatic. That would be a little too much for your immune system to handle.
For Discovery News, I'm Jorge Ribas, and that's The Pollen Count is High Explained.
So there you go. Pollen is everywhere. It's all around us. It's in the room right now with you. And as some of you know who have allergy problems this time of year especially, pollen is in the air everywhere. Here's an example of how pollen was used by a professor at Texas A&M forensically to solve a case of well, I'll let him explain it. Check this out.
One of the things that I have been working on quite a bit lately has been the problem of transshipping honey. This has really become a big problem in the United States, and the reason for this is that China is the leading honey producer in the world, and they have been literally dumping honey in the United States for years. And what this does, of course, is undercuts the price of honey in the United States for domestic beekeepers. What China is now doing is instead sending the honey to other countries, which then send the honey to the United States as being originating in those countries. And why would they do that? Because the United States has put a 200 to 500% tariff on Chinese honey because of all their dumping activities. The way you can determine where the honey comes from is by looking at the pollen in the honey, because it gives a clue to the location of where it was produced, and that's my job.
So there you go. There's an example of pollen being used as evidence in a forensic way. If you, of all the things we have studied in forensic science, if you're inspired by pollen, you might want to become a palynologist. You need to know the term palynology, which is basically the study of pollen. And we're going to talk about real quickly who uses palynology. And it actually falls into several different categories. Geologists, for example, use palynology because it allows them to understand where petroleum and water and other things came from, as well as just to unravel history of plants on the earth, which is an important part of geology. Then there are geographers. You've seen maps that show the range of plants and range of all kinds of things related to plants, but they also use it to investigate climatic and environmental change that goes on, which is a really important field right now, trying to understand global warming and to what extent it's really happening. And so palynology comes into play in that as well. Botanists, of course, plant scientists, have to know about pollen because they have to know about plants. So there you go. Immunologists. Why would immunologists need to know about pollen? Well, it's because of you allergy and asthma sufferers, and so they investigate what the cause of certain allergens in pollen are. Archaeologists. Archaeologists look at pollen to understand what people used to eat and what kind of plants they used to grow. So it helps them to understand the customs, rituals, and practices of ancient peoples. Then there are zoologists and the environmental scientists too. And of course, they're going to be looking at plants to understand everything about animals and native vegetation, and also maybe to protect endangered species. So palynology comes into play in a lot of different fields. And of course, what we're concerned about is how does it come into play with forensic science. So forensic palynologists are basically experts who use pollen and spores to link objects and people to crime scenes. How might that happen? At a crime scene, if an object or an item of clothing is left at a crime scene and you're gathering trace evidence, remember the technique we used to gather hair and fiber off of clothing using pieces of tape? Suppose you do that and you start to find that also mixed in with hair and fiber samples there are pollen grains. Now if you find pollen grains and you find, for example, pollen grains that are identified as oak or as red cedar right now, that doesn't help a whole lot. But as you can see from the picture on the screen right now, pollen grains come in all different shapes and sizes. So if an unusual pollen grain is found, it might tie that person to a certain place or a certain home, and it might become very important class evidence to understand some things about the suspect, maybe who they are even. So here's how it works. For one thing, pollen is everywhere, like we said. But what is pollen? Take a minute to stop the video and see if anyone knows. What is pollen? Pollen is the male reproductive cells of the plants. So that's when you're breathing in pollen, that's what you're breathing in. Here's a number that is not in your handout, and you do need to know there are approximately 240,000 different plant species that produce pollen. And here's the thing, pollen is as unique to the plant as a fingerprint is to an individual person. And so each kind of plant has pollen grains that are different. They're different in appearance and shape and size and color. And so sometimes pollen grains become very important as far as forensic evidence is concerned. So pollen is unique to the plant, 240,000 different species that produce pollen on the planet that we know. We're not going to worry about you don't have to write this whole thing down, but just a reminder from 7th grade science, gymnosperms are plants whose seeds are not enclosed in an ovule. Gymnosperm means naked seed or uncovered seed. Angiosperms are plants where the mature seed is surrounded by the ovule like an apple is. And so keep in mind those two different kinds of plants because their pollen looks different. Angiosperm pollen grains tend to be smooth and have this coating on them, and gymnosperms tend to have a spiky appearance and be very sharp, just generally speaking. So what can pollen do for us as forensic scientists at a crime scene or in a crime situation? Sometimes it can tell you where. If the person has been in the presence of a unique kind of plant and they carry that pollen, leave it at a crime scene or on their person, it can possibly tell you approximately where they have been. It can also tell you when. Why can it tell you when? It can tell you when because pollen is seasonal, and so if a crime was committed and a dead body that's been there for a long time is discovered, by looking at the pollen grains on the person's clothing, it might give us a window as to when when the crime occurred, just by the pollen that's present there. We're going to take a look at a segment about testimony in the famous Casey Anthony trial.
We're several weeks into this trial. The defense calling a forensic botanist today. She testified based on leak patterns that little Kaylee's body may have only been in the woods for 2 weeks. Cross-examination went pretty rough for that witness, and we want to talk more about some of the forensic evidence. Dr. Larry Kobylinski is a forensic pathologist at John Jay College, widely respected in this field. So, doctor, what do you think about this botanist, what she had to say about the leaf growth and what it tells us about the timeline?
Well, Jenna, I think what we're seeing here is a strategy by the defense to neutralize each and every expert brought by the prosecution.
Is it working?
It is definitely working, because there is a diametrically different opinion of the botanist, Jane Bach, today as compared to the state's botanist. Let me just say this, that whatever the experts do, it's got to be based on a sound scientific foundation. I'm an advocate for good science, and in both cases, they're talking about the growth rate of vegetation. And for that, you need a database, you need a study, and so both of these people are giving their expert opinion, but not based on a good scientific foundation. I think one's hunch is as good as the other's, and I think there's an effective neutralization going on right now.
It sounds like you're not convinced by the evidence so far.
I don't think this is very good evidence for determining the postmortem interval.
What would you do?
Well, I think you have to look at the entomology. Certainly the vegetation is very important, but I think that the problem is for the state, because, their theory is that Casey Anthony left Kaylee there 6 months before the body was found, and they have to prove that, and the burden's on them, and they're not doing that. That's the issue, I think, for the defense.
It's interesting to hear you criticize, or, constructively criticize the state's case here, because most of the criticism has been towards the defense and a focus on the inexperience of the defense team. As far as the experts that the defense is bringing forward, what do you know about these experts that they put on the stand? Are they legit?
They're very legit. Let me just make sure that the viewers understand. I am a consultant for the defense team, so but I'm being as fair and balanced as I could possibly be. These people are extremely well known in the profession. Werner Spitz is a pioneer in pathology. Bill Rodriguez is extremely well known as an anthropologist. They're bringing forward some real top-notch expertise. And again, you can look at the same item of evidence and have a completely different opinion. And that's what, again, the defense is doing. They are neutralizing the state's case bit by bit.
Dr. Kobylinski, nice to have you. We look forward to having you back again.
It's a pleasure.
In the Casey Anthony trial, what happens often in a trial case happened in this case, where the defense and the prosecution had dueling paleontologists or dueling forensic scientists who had a different view of the vegetation that was at the body of the 2-year-old Casey Anthony's baby that was found dead. And she was tried for the murder, and she was actually acquitted of the murder, although it was determined she did lie to police and she did serve time in jail for doing those things. Today you're going to be dissecting a daylily, which is really cool. And here is a good view of that flower. This will be made available to you too. But as you work through it, be careful with the scalpel and do a great job on your dissection. I will plan to see you guys on Friday. So have a great day with your sub there. Thanks a lot, guys.